Right, so good afternoon, everybody. This is the Professional Statisticians Forum meeting on excellence and innovation in official statistics about engaging and communicating with users. I'm Andy Silverland, and I'll be chairing this event. Today I'm in the RSS building in London, together with the speakers. I used to be in days past a GSS head of profession. These days I eke out a living as a consultant. So we have two talks for you this afternoon. You will be aware that the RSS Official Statistics Awards are jointly awarded by the RSS and by the UK Statistics Authority, and these are to recognise and celebrate developments in official statistics, and they have been going several years now. And what we have for you this afternoon is presentations by the winners and runners-up of the 2016 awards, and they're going to talk a bit about the work that led to the awards. We had the Department of Transport talking about road safety statistics, and the Department of Communities and Local Government talking about index multiple deprivation. And we want to talk particularly also about the way the work was done and how it's developed. I would like to introduce our first speaker, and also the rest of the team who are also here. The speaker is Daryl Lloyd, who's now actually moved on and is now at DFID, the Department for International Development, for the last 2 weeks. However, he tells me he's spent 10 years at the Department for Transport, including the last 4 years on road safety. And he's been for many years in the GSS, in a variety of acronym-laden departments, many of which no longer exist. But for those of you with a historical bent, ODPM and PMDU, working at various points on housing and geography. Also in the room, although they won't be speaking, but possibly in the questions, David Mais, who Daryl tells me actually did the work, and he's been at DFT for 4 years and done various posts in environment, road safety, and recently has moved on to buses. Prior to that, he did a maths and economics degree at university. And also Lizzie Vloch, who will be doing the work in the future, and she's new to the Department of Transport, fresh from doing a PhD in public health, looking at disability in old age. So those are the people who have done and will do the work and will present the work. And without further ado, I'll introduce Daryl and ask him to present his talk.
Thanks very much, Andy. Nice to see you all this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to be talking through a number of the things that we think contributed to us being put forward for the award and winning. A lot of those things are actually relatively simple things about communication and thinking about users, and hopefully there are messages there that can be learned particularly by other government departments and things that we can all learn from each other. This is an ever-improving area. So just to give to frame, a lot of the work here we're talking about is part of road safety, and so we're looking at the majority of data coming from the police about accidents or collisions that happen on the road where someone's injured. And you frequently hear the term, I'll try and avoid it, the term Stats 19, which is a reference to an ancient form police officers filled out 50 years ago that no longer exists in that proper term. But the term has continued, Stats 19, but we tend to use it because the phrase police reported road traffic accident is quite long, a bit more complex. So I'll try to avoid Stats 19, but if I do, that's what it means. It's basically a form they fill out about anyone who's been injured in an accident. So this isn't just a story about road safety. It's not just a story about a process and direction the whole of transport statistics has taken. A lot of these developments and improvements have been something that have been taken across the board and have been much of a corporate approach. And part of that is about presentation, so style, layout, using infographics, how we address commentary and topics and what goes in. And going beyond that traditional GSS approach, where we say numbers have gone up or numbers have gone down, things have not changed or things have changed. If we go back 10, 15 years, that was the classic way of giving commentary or lack of commentary across official statistics. Now we're looking much more towards explaining what happens and explaining to users why we're seeing those trends. So, well, we look at the publication. Most of the time they were 4 years out, which I think a bit like this into One Direction. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who may disagree with that, or probably do disagree with that. But they don't really have much in. So, if we think about this slide 4 here, we've got the exciting front page of a 2007 road casualties Great Britain statistics. We think it's got some fantastic stuff in. Inside we've got a page of commentary. I think, well, that's good stuff. And then we've got, a table. Okay, there must be some more commentary perhaps. And then we've got another page. This is what I thought. So we have a publication, a headline publication, saying how you were killed and injured in 2006 on the roads. Pretty serious stuff. We have 1 page of commentary, and that was it, and a bunch of tables. Not really very engaging, not really giving users much explanation or understanding. Fortunately, we had a second publication later on in the year where things were a bit more interesting, and the report came out in September, a bit more information there. So let's have a quick look at that. There were some articles, and it's probably quite hard to read just because of the slides, but the article we published that year on the index of loss of deprivation. So ties in beautifully to our second speaker today. So there is some commentary. It's a bit more detail. We did write stuff, but it doesn't look that exciting. It's lots of words and a few tables, but nothing particularly engaged. Oh, there's some charts as well. So not as bad as that first one, but still not really kind of as engaging or inviting as we want to be. And again, most of the commentary here is about description. What do the figures show? Not what is it saying about society and the world around us. So the Department of Transport decided to take a number of changes to try and improve this. So the first thing we adopted was a kind of a corporate and professional template, which kind of gave a picture of the whole of DFT. So we all have the same image, it's a bit more engaging, and we tried to move away from describing just the trend to explaining the trend and providing context and background to it. So we can see as we move forward, 2012, this is the equivalent of that first I showed in 2007. This is what we did in 2012. Already it looks far more inviting. It's not just 1 page of commentary. There's actually a few pages of commentary. I think there are about 8 or 9 of them. But we're trying to give a lot more context. So this slide here, so slide 17 for those of you who've got packs rather than on the screen. We're trying to explain why casualties change or why fatalities went up and down during the year. And what we have in the middle there is a change in casualty numbers from the same quarter the previous year. So it's comparing 2012, each quarter, to each different road type, road user, with what happened in the previous year. So we basically say casualty numbers change, and then it gives an explanation. So part of it is because the top chart, that is how far people travel. So we're using the National Travel Survey data. So we're trying to give some context and information about why the patterns are driving the casualty changes. So exposure changes, so the amount of people's travel changes, but that's also explained by how wet or dry it was that year. So we've got the bottom chart, the change in precipitation, that's normal language, rainfall, but strictly speaking, it doesn't mean snowfall and hail and other things that fall out of the sky. It's wet, but mostly rain, unless you're in Scotland. But a lot of the changes we've all seen in the National Travel Survey, so how far people travel, particularly as motorcyclists and cyclists and pedestrians, will relate back to how wet it was. So we're trying to give that story and a flavour about not just casualties have gone up or down, but what it is that's driven them. And I'll come back to the message of weather later, because that's quite a significant development. Just a few more pages now of the publication, but we can see it's a lot more wordy, there's a lot more detail in there about explaining. But that wasn't enough. DFT wasn't happy with where we were there. We wanted to kind of really push things on. So all that work, all that kind of design information we had there basically came out of Word. So the next step we thought was actually to really kind of try and professionalize it. So use we use Adobe InDesign to form much better templates, try and reflect some of the publications we see coming out of industry and there's other sectors that are very good at communicating. So this is the kind of template we work off these days. All of DSC publications have this general style. We may tweak things, we may put boxes in slightly different places, but all the publications have the same corporate style. They use simplified graphs. So if you look on slide 21 here, so the chart on the front page there, it's kind of stripped back to its bare necessity, but it really shows a trend without things getting in the way. And that's the kind of message you want to communicate. And again, as we step through, we can see it's broken up by little boxes, links to things, links directly to tables, little infographics. It just makes things much easier for users to dip into and kind of get the message. Again, we step through the page here about car occupants with some standardised charts at the top. And then the bit that David always cursed over, the background, the category trend section. I was an academic by background, and it meant that sometimes when I was writing things, I find it very hard to stop, and usually David would be saying, I need to close set this. I want to InDesign stop writing if I get to my 20th page of writing something that may not make any sense whatsoever. But it was about going beyond that simple explanation. So I sort of pull out a couple of paragraphs, which kind of give an indication of how we try to go beyond just explain the trends. The changes in road depth over recent years show categories as chance. So we relate this back to randomness, and not clearly all accidents and collisions are caused by something, but the random nature of collisions is actually quite important. So we and this paragraph relating it back to the numbers of deaths are quite small. In the graph, you think 700 people being killed is far too many. But given how many people are in the country, how often people travel, it's actually quite a small number. So we're going to expect it to fluctuate over the years, irrespective of what's going on. So we're trying to kind of give that kind of background. And as the second paragraph says, the only logical conclusion for this is that there is no net change in road safety, specifically related to road deaths at the moment. So we're trying to give that kind of very clear implications of what the figures say, as well as saying what the figures are. Actually, from again, academic background, sometimes give that slightly speculative areas, but at least it allows users to get a sense of what things may be driving the figures. And I've just got a few more pages there, just to give examples of how the charts get used to describe things. So we've got a couple of charts there, representation on page 25, and then infographics. So the thing that David always puts together very nicely for the publications is a single page snapshot of the key figures, the key headline figures in simple, nice infographics, easy to understand, easy for people to use, and great for policy users because they can pick up one of those charts, just drop it into presentations, or drop it into publications, use it for engaging with stakeholders, engaging with outside users. So it's easy take-home messages. Big ones, infographics there. They can be a very effective and good way of communicating those key messages. But it is important to make them simple and consistent. And developing a corporate identity and style can really help with that. And if you saw the ones we had on the slides earlier, they all look of similar nature. And that does kind of make that communication easier. And it helps you to compare sections of the same publication. So I'll just show very quickly the two slides we had before. So on the left-hand side there, you've already seen this page, on page slide 28 now. Left-hand side, trying to give information about car occupants. That section was repeated for each road user type in the same layout and the same format. So when you went to car occupants, you saw the same chart as when you saw motorcyclists and cyclists. So you could take home those messages. And then to say the right-hand slide there is that, the right-hand page is that infographics page that had, you could print up on its own, and if you wanted the key figures to give somebody, that's what you just put in front of a minister or someone from an important pressure group and say, that is what you need to know about what happened in 2015. But you do need to be very careful. It's very easy So I play one of the fantastic games now, Spot the Bad Infographic. None of these came from official government statistics, obviously, because we would never produce anyway the official statistics, bad infographics. But these are some great examples which I found recently looking around the web. So, page 30, or slide 30, we've got a chart that is incredibly busy. I think it's probably come as a newspaper or a magazine, but the fact that it's trying to put about violent crime rates, and you've got this image of the police cars behind with multiple colours. It's just everything gets lost. It becomes so difficult to read. Not a great way of communicating your message. The next one is how baby boomers describe themselves. So here this is from a survey asking about people to use words to describe themselves. We've got, I can't even really hear myself now. Say leaders willing to learn. So people say which of these categories, are they a leader? Are they willing to learn? Are they tech savvy? But somehow we might just stack it up in such a way that the population comes out to like 250%. It just doesn't. It's not a sensible way to render that information collected. The information collected is fine, but in terms of a communication method, it's muddled and confusing. This is a great one of not really having a clue what you're doing with an infographic. So this is from an American football team describing how they're going to come across to London to play an American football match. That's the London that's probably located around Barcelona in Spain rather than in England. Clearly, someone hasn't thought, where is London? It's not in Spain. As much as it is my Spain, it's nice and sunny right at the moment, but it doesn't feel like it's the Mediterranean coast out there today. They're also going to use, allegedly, the team of staff will use 3 planes to London, except for the fact the first plane is to come back from London. So, you just look at it and think, well, you clearly haven't thought about what you're producing. Or the classic one, this on the slide 30, the classic example here of misrepresenting scale. So we've got this seemingly enormous increase in nurses recruited, except for the fact the numbers have gone from 43,000 up to 46,000. So by that mass overemphasis of the differences between what is actually a fairly small number, and it just, again, as an infographic, it might have worked had it actually been a genuine trying to look like it's kind of a 5-times rise. It's not. It's a tiny rise. So I think that's probably the stuff. And then the dreaded 3D pie chart. But even better, a 3D pie chart that seems to have 66% that, to my eye, looks about a third of a pie, not 66%. So I generally don't know how anyone's made a chart that looks that bad, because there's just no value in it. So it's very easy to knock off a quick infographic, a quick chart that doesn't communicate properly and confuses things and detracts from what you're trying to say. Now, the next example is an example of a bad infographic, but it's actually an example of how you can improve by corporate style. So what we've got here is a 2015 and 2016 edition of DFID's Statistical International Development publication. So 2015 one, they're not great infographics, but they're not terrible. But what's critical when you look at how they improved it for the next year. So on the right-hand side, on slide 32, the right side is the version published in 2016, about 2015 figures. Left-hand side, 2015, about 2014 figures. Instantly, that corporate message, corporate style, just makes it much more readable. It makes it look more professional. And it's much better to do that than sort of throw random things onto a page and hope it works. So we've got to be careful about infographics. So from that, there's kind of a rule I'm going to take over about the publications and communication. Make it look interesting and engaging, because that helps users. The next kind of critical thing that we spend a lot of time doing is listen to users. So I was very fortunate here on page 34. This is a letter that was sent to me by an organisation called PACS, the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, and they outlined 10 things they wanted to do about citizen publications. A very, very clear message from users about what they want to see, a very influential user. So there's 2 things I'm going to pick up on. The first one is a about weather here and the second one is about significance testing. And these are two things we particularly focused on during 2015 to kind of really improve the communication and the messaging. And weather has become very important to us when looking at road casualties. And partly because, as here we see on slide 35 in the chart, in 2011, after many years of falls of road fatalities, we suddenly had an increase. And this was going against the long-term trend. It caught everyone by surprise. But those of you who remember 2010 may well remember that 2010 was marred by both the beginning and end of the year by snowfall and a lot of snow across a lot of the country. And what our conclusion was that, most likely, people don't travel in snow. So you might think, actually, bad weather. There's going to be more accidents bad weather because the roads are slippy and they're dangerous. Well, they are, but what happens is people don't go out. So if it's lots of snow, I don't drive, or I don't walk, I get in the train, or stay at home, even better. It's going to go by tomorrow, so I might as well just wait out and make a snowman instead. So we get massive reductions in exposure for people to travel. That actually makes the road much safer. So if we made it snow all year round, there'd be no one killed on the road. There'd be lots of other problems, mostly from pneumonia and other medical things, so half will die from that. But it'd be much better. It would be much safer. So what we did worked on is that was, I mean, our response was, it's probably the weather, but we haven't got any quantitative evidence to demonstrate that. So working with the Office of National Statistics and a cross-government project looking at weather and official statistics, we constructed a model to try and quantify how casualty numbers vary and affected by the weather. So slide 26 here, we've got some output model. Basically what we're trying to show here is for each road casualty road severity, fatalities, people are seriously injured, numbers slightly injured, and for each of the main road use routes we think are affected by the weather, so pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, car occupants, what the model says will have happened when the weather is better or worse than usual. So easy way to see an example. So what we've got here is saying in January, if the temperature is higher than average, higher than the long-term average, that we tend to get more cyclists and motorcyclist fatalities. That's basically because if it's warm, they go out further. And if they're out on the road, they're going to be accidents, and there'll be an increase in fatalities. In contrast, in September, if we have below average precipitation, we get less rain than usual, we're going to get fewer motorcyclist fatalities. That's a bit of a strange one, but that's not about exposure. We're saying there's less rain, but fewer fatalities. That's probably, they're going to travel whether it's raining or not, but if the roads are drier, they're safer. They're less likely to slip. So we get these kind of complex mixtures. But what it does mean is by modelling this through, we can quantify the effect and we can start to adjust time series. So what we have here on slide 37 is that the green line was the original series of the number of people killed. So we've got that increase from 2010 to 2011. When we model it through and say, well, actually, has the weather been similar to the long-term average for those months? The orange line is what the number of deaths we think there would have been. So actually, that increase in 2011 gets wiped out. So it kind of proves our original hypothesis that increase was really driven by the weather. And when we looked at 2014, there was, again, a big increase in the number of deaths on the roads. When we take into account the weather, there is an increase, but it's much, much smaller. And what this means for practitioners is they can take the adjusted series and say, that's dealt with the weather element. What's left is probably relates much more to the things we can affect. So I can't change, as a road safety practitioner or a road highway engineer in the local authority, I can't change the weather. But once I've taken that stuff out, I can see what the effects of my interfaces have been. So it helps people understand, helps them take action. So we tried to publicize the model and then produce an article which was in Significance magazine last year, and we've just published an international fact sheet for an OECD group, and David has been at a number of conferences to talk about it. So we've been trying to kind of get used, because the model is adaptable, we use across countries, and even change to different kinds of statistics. So, and that's part of why ONS is kind of pushing it. So hopefully we'll see more in official statistics about weather in the future. The other thing that our users flagged up against was statistical significance. They were always seeing figures, and we're always seeing lots of statistics change over time, and it's always important to help users interpret those changes. Are they meaningful? Does it matter what the changes are? Now, these are what we've got here are casualties, so they're complete counts, not samples. So there's one argument saying, well, surely all changes are significant because it's not a sample. Except for the fact that, as I said earlier, road collisions, accidents, and casualties all have a random element. They've all been caused by behaviours in the vast majority of the cases. Someone's been going a bit too fast, someone's taking a corner a bit too wildly, someone is drunk. So there are lots of causes about people's behaviour, but nevertheless, there's definite random elements. So being 1 mile per hour faster or slower, or a fraction earlier or later, could be the difference between an accident or not an accident, or someone dying or someone being injured. So we do need to take into account this randomness, and therefore it is important to know about statistical significance. So what we've introduced again over the last couple of years is estimate, or is a test. Well, we're going to do 2 tests. Those certificates are on slide 40 here. And what we have on the first one is a direct comparison between years. So this is a 2014-2015. Was the change in fatalities, seriously injured, slightly injured, significant or not? So what we can see there is the decrease in fatalities wasn't statistically significant, but the decrease in serious injuries and slight injuries was statistically significant at 95% confidence. As well as that, though, we also accept the fact that the trend, there's a long-term trend in what's happening to casualties. So we forecast that trend. We say, well, if that trend continues, where do we think fatalities would have been this year, and do a test against that. So what we can test with there is actually that although we've had a significant reduction in serious injuries, that hasn't changed from where we expected it to be. So whatever we've been doing in the past is continuing to work, but whatever has happened recently hasn't made any additional gains or have any additional losses. So again, it helps practitioners and users understand where things are heading towards and whether things are getting better or worse. I think one of the final things is that kind of headline figure headline message is quite important. So what we've started doing is putting on the front page of our publications, on slide 41 here, little boxes about what we can conclude and what we cannot conclude. And a lot of that is based around that statistical significance. So yes, deaths have gone down, but we cannot conclude that change is due to any substantial change in road safety. It is more likely to relate to the randomness. So yeah, it looks good, but don't celebrate because we've not done enough to actually bring about that change. It's much more likely something random, something outside our control. So we try and be very clear about that. And by putting it on the front page, it stops people from taking home the wrong messages. So just kind of means we can add some more rules. We have that first rule, make it interesting and engaging. A second rule there is what your users are interested in and answer the questions they have. They're the ones that you're writing or producing official statistics for. You will have internal users of excellent users, but they're the ones that are using the data and statistics. So make sure you understand what they want. Go beyond just explaining trends and patterns, why these patterns exist and what that should mean to users. Rule 4. And then rule 4 is that give clear and simple explanations about technical aspects. And uncertainty is very, very important in this. It's very easy to forget that official statistics are not absolute facts. They are, in many cases, estimates, and we need to reflect that. Lots of credit for his work. A lot of it has been cross-DFT work, not just within the road safety team. So credit there to everyone who led on the publication template in transport statistics, and people who led on visualization infographics there, and David Mais, DFT, who did all the weather modeling work, Joseph at ONS, and David and Alice Marshall for creating all the road safety charts and graphics and layouts in a far better way than I ever could do. Which leads me to and Ministry of Justice Data Lab for the what we cannot and cannot say boxes. I stole it from them. But it's full fast highlighted this. And that gives me rule number 5. If you see someone doing something good, something useful, something valuable, steal it. Because don't just bury it for yourself. Other people do great things. Take what they do and adapt it and use it yourself.
This has been on the this has been developed and presented over the last year or two. I'm just interested to know what feedback have you had from the sort of DFT type users, and how have they viewed it? What sort of things do they like and not like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very lucky. Road safety is very strong as a policy topic. It's very strongly evidence driven. Probably much more so than most bits of government. We're very fortunate in that. And it means that our policy team internally very much values these kind of developments. They're particularly interested in statistical significance. They're a bit less interested in the weather modelling. I think that's a bit too esoteric for them, and a bit too much about it. Well, actually, what is valuable for them is being able to take that message back. Say, fatalities have gone down, but it is the weather, or it's not significant. And that means they can give very clear messages to press office and to ministers. Say, yes, it looks good this year, but don't celebrate. Don't go out and say, we fixed the world. Because next year we'll get a kick in the teeth. If it's random, or if it's because the weather's been really bad this year, next year it could be the weather could be the opposite, and figures could go the opposite way. If we try and claim the credit that it's now, we'll look silly next time in. So actually have given them a tool and capabilities to be able to respond and be able to temper those messages and make sure that press office understands and ministers understand about what they should and shouldn't be taking credit for or thinking about the future. So they particularly value that. They've been particularly interested in the statistical significance again for that same reason. And I think other things we've been doing that I haven't talked about here is developing data dashboards so they can actually produce quick figures themselves, which I think is something they've sort of adopted. They can start digging into figures, get stuff out far more quickly. So I've not really developed that area, and I know that's again an area a number of different departments are working on these days, whether it's internal or external dashboards, using things like Power BI or Excel.
What's Power BI?
Power BI, for those of you who don't know, Power BI is a tool built by Microsoft. It allows you to build almost make an interactive web page with charts, maps, driven all by Excel data or data in a database, which you can then publish online. Or publish on the internet. And it allows what you could have, for instance, is charts of fatalities, and you could over a time series, and you could select different road user types and be able to see how the patterns change for each of the road user types. So it's a quick way to kind of give interactive headline figures out to people. And because it doesn't require masses of coding, it's something that people can pick up relatively easily. And I think probably what I can gather, most departments, certainly most government departments, have got access to Power BI as part of standard Microsoft packages these days. So there's certainly quite a bit of work going on around the place.
Okay. I think the other point I just wanted to ask about is clearly, I mean, you've done, and the whole team has done a lot of very good development work here and produced what is, I mean, I remember from being in the Department for Transport 20-something years ago that we laboured over these books of tables and things. So it's clearly much more interesting for the users than that. One of the issues with doing that is there's quite a lot of work involved in taking it from the batch of tables to the conclusions, and often when departments are under a lot of pressure to make savings, that's the sort of work that people see as sort of secondary.
Yeah.
I just wondered how you saw that developing and what sort of arguments you could deploy to try to continue this sort of work.
Well, I think certainly one of the ways that we find we have the resource to do that now is, certainly if you go back in time, creating those tables. We've published about 120 tables in September. Creating those tables by hand, as I say, is a very, very laborious process. But because of changes and improvements in technology and using databases, it is possible to invest the time to automate that. So actually, we have our table production. We can do all our tables in a day. So we use databases, VBA, and Excel to do it. That actually gets us a lot of time back. And that time, 5-10 years ago, would have been weeks and weeks and weeks of stats officers physically using Excel to build tables one by one and going through and updating rows. So we get a lot of that time resource back from there, which we can reuse. But the other thing that perhaps maybe I resist, and this works both ways, the more explicit you are about communicating about the trends and what's going on, the less people need to ask you. Equally, it means you can get a lot of interest, and people therefore ask you things you never even thought, or they hadn't even thought they could ask last week, and now suddenly realize they can't because they didn't realize you could do it. So it can work in both areas. Exactly the same as transparency and open data. You can save a lot of time by releasing open data, but actually, what it may do is the people that can't use it, make them realise that there are things they can test you about and come to you to get. So it's finding that balance between being able to release and put out enough information that reduces questions but without generating too many new ones, taking up all the time. So it can be a kind of resource saving there if it can reduce the number of responses you need to do later on.
I think it also sounds like it probably lifts the level of the discussion.
Yeah,
because instead of saying, what's this number, people say, why is this?
Why is it happening? And for very operational, I mean, Rotex is a great example because clearly, as a department has very strong strategic interest in understanding why trends are happening. But there are hundreds of road safety officers working out in local authorities all over the country who aren't just interested from a strategic point of view, they're interested from an operational point of view. And what does it mean what implications they have for specific junctions they have out there? And when they're redesigning junctions or thinking about what's the things that are driving the patterns in their areas, what we write about can help. So when we get into a kind of discussion about driving trends, we're discussing factors such as an aging population, or an aging population who drives more. As we get more and more people on the road over certain ages, they're more likely to be in accidents just because reaction speeds are slower. And if they are in an accident, whether it's a pedestrian or a car driver, they're more likely to be injured. So the more we highlight that, and the more that message at a national level, the more that at the local level, things like public health and road safety practitioners can take those messages on board and build that into their plans, thinking like, what do I need to do in Eastbourne, where I have a much higher proportion of older people than other parts of the country. So yeah, it helps them. It helps them think about those factors more, as you say there, and probably then helps them translate that into improved services on their own side.
So thank you very much to Daryl for that presentation. Our second presentation today is about the English Indices of Deprivation 2015. And this is to be given by Baljit Gill, who's now at the Cabinet Office. There seems to be a pattern here of people moving on. But she tells me she's on loan from DCLG and working on the race disparity audit, which was announced last year by the Prime Minister. She was the lead for DCLG, the Department of Community and Local Government, on indices of deprivation. She's been a statistician in the GSS for a number of years, starting at ONS on social survey design and done a variety of jobs on the psychiatric morbidity survey and the literacy survey. So So, without further ado, I'll invite Baljit to give her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to speak about the work that was done by the Department of Communities and Local Government together with the Oxford Consultants for Social Inclusion as we revised and updated the English Indices of Deprivation. So I'll move on to what I'd like to cover today. And so my focus is going to be, first of all, I'm just giving a short introduction to what the indices are, and then to cover the areas for which we were highly commended by the RSS and the UK Statistics Authority around our work on quality and quality assurance, our user engagement, and clear communication. So if I may move on to the next slide, the main output that we have is the index of multiple deprivation. It's really, really widely recognised and well used. And what it does is measures relative deprivation at the neighbourhood level in England. Now, by neighbourhoods, what I'm talking about here are those really small statistical geography of lower layer super output areas. And these are areas of around 1,500 people each. So we're talking about very small area statistics. And there are almost 33,000 such areas in England. So what the IMD is effectively doing then is allowing us to rank small areas in England from the most deprived to the very least deprived, but very much with a focus on actually where are the most deprived areas in the country where we might want to focus particular attention. It's probably worth noting that there are similar indices in the devolved administrations that are based on a similar framework and methodology, but there are sufficient differences to mean that they are not comparable directly. Now, using this framework and methodology that we'll be talking about today, the indices were first produced for the 2000 indices of deprivation, and we are now at the 5th version of these. So the IMD is a composite. It's comprised of 7 domains of deprivation. So we also have measures of income deprivation, employment deprivation, looking at education, health, crime, barriers to housing and services, and the living environment. So there's a lot of flexibility here in that people can choose to use the composite index or domain indices, and they can look at this not only at the neighbourhood level, but also at higher level geographies as they please, but most commonly they tend to get used at local authority levels. When we think about our users, they are very commonly used by people working in local government, central government, in health, the voluntary and community sector. They're used by elected members, local councillors, and academics. And they're using them very much to think about area-based targeting, so which are the areas they might prioritise for either funding or other interventions, for developing of their local strategies, such as the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. They're used in making funding bids and for tracking deprived areas, and also for assessing inequalities and research into that. To give you an idea, they're actually the most popular government statistic. In the 10 months following publication, we had 150,000 web hits on our main page, 108,000 unique ones. So this is a really well-recognised and well-used output. It's also an incredibly complex one. So moving on to the next slide, I'd just like to talk a bit about actually what sits beneath this. And I mentioned also that there are 7 domains. Those domains are not equally weighted. They don't contribute equally to the index of multiple deprivation. Income deprivation and employment deprivation actually carry the heaviest weight together, nearly comprising half of the weight of the indices. And in each of these domains, you've got a basket of indicators. It's a relatively modest basket. The point is that these are meant to be measuring the major features of that deprivation. We need to have data that's up to date and can be updated. And it's got to, of course, be statistically robust at this very small area level and consistently across England. And it's that latter point that actually particularly restricts the availability of data for the indices. examples then, if you look at the income deprivation domain or the employment deprivation domain, we're talking here about using administrative data sources held by the Department for Work and Pensions, by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which tell us about people who are in receipt of a range of benefits and tax credits. But in other domains, we're talking about using a separate range of indicators around health, or to use police recorded crime data for the crime domain on a range of different types of crime. But it's one thing to say, okay, we've found a whole bunch of indicators. How do you actually put them together? What do you need to do? And so there's also a range, there's also a complex methodology behind this that's very well established now. We've already agreed then what are the domains and what are the indicators that fall within them. But there are a number of quite complex statistical processes. For example, we need to do some work to ensure and improve the reliability of small area estimates, particularly where they might be out of range relative to the area that they sit in. We also want to think about, well, now we've got the indicators in a domain, how are we going to actually put them together? They're on different metrics, they've got different distributions. Also, we want to then put the domains together. And if you imagine that you've got an area where, let's say, it's very highly deprived on educational deprivation, but not at all highly deprived on health deprivation, there's a risk that those could cancel each other out. So you have to have statistical processes in place to make sure that you do continue to measure deprivation when these things might otherwise cancel out. So what we have here is a very difficult challenge in communicating how you make up these indices, what steps are taken, and also the quality of them. The actual output, though, is a ranking, and it's, as I said, the index of multiple deprivation is a means of ranking deprivation in small areas. And because it's a ranking rather than a score, there are quite a number of restrictions on how it can be used that users also need to be aware of. So if I can come now to what we were actually aiming to do when we were reviewing and updating the indices of deprivation 2010, what we felt was in scope was that we wanted to, in each of these domains, review the basket of indicators and are there any potential new ones. We felt that the data landscape may have moved on. There may be some new data available. There's lots of interest, for example, in topics like fuel poverty or access to the internet, and what else should we perhaps thinking about? We wanted to check whether the statistical methods I've just described are actually still justified, and are there any alternatives that are now appropriate? And then we wanted to then get on with actually producing the update. So we commissioned the Oxford Consultants for Social Inclusion to do this work for us, and they included working with NAPS then to help us with user engagement. But I just wanted to share with you some of the other ambitions that we had about how we would go about this work. We felt that actually we wanted to produce the most accessible indices to date. You know, there's lots of developments in things like open data. We wanted to make sure we were taking advantage of those things. We wanted to actually make sure that we had informed users. We're conscious at that time that we're getting lots of queries from users. Some of them are very simple, some are more complex. But what more information can we actually share with them? And we knew that we had some users with concerns about quality that we wanted to address. And there were some particular examples, actually, like in health, we had people who were concerned that some of the indicators might have been subject to gaming of those indicators as collected by health trusts. There were other concerns, for example, around the crime data domain, and particularly that police recorded crime was under a lot of criticism, and that the actual geographic coding of those crimes might not be accurate, and therefore would be giving a misleading picture of where crime deprivation is really occurring. And I just wanted to sort of reflect a bit on this, in that at the time when I took over working on the indices, we just had an observation that statisticians move on, and when I took over the indices, there wasn't actually a statistician in post anymore, so I was very much reliant on published information and the documentation to be able to make sure I now understand the indices, I can help people with their queries, I can help them with their concerns about data quality. And actually, I confess, I found it really, really difficult. So I think I've had a first-hand experience of what it's like to try to use the information that we put out there and make good sense of it. So I think personally, I was very, very invested in these first 3 points around making these indices more accessible, to provide better and clearer documentation, and to get a clearer perspective of indicator quality and the implications, like to what extent does this actually undermine the overall quality of the index of multiple deprivation itself. There were at that time, for example, 117 pages in a technical report. It was very, very granular information. It was unclear to me how these things were really stacking up and what was most important. So another thing, though, that we did want to do as we went about doing this update was make sure that we had very good user engagement as part of the update process, and to embed it in that process to make sure that we understood users and their needs, and we had the opportunity to consult them. And again, in the backdrop of this, we were hoping to be passed as we were being assessed by the UK Statistics Authority, hoping to be awarded national statistics status. Okay, so I want to particularly start by looking at the issues around quality. The need to both ensure that we have reliable indices and to make sure we communicate that in a useful way. And we spent a lot of effort actually documenting this. So we've got a technical report, and the links are later on in the slide pack, where we have a whole chapter and some appendices dedicated to this topic. But chiefly the things we wanted to do was to put things into perspective for users. So, this is the point about, although we're seeing very good quality, well-established data sources, do concerns about data sources possibly undermine the actual integrity of the indices? What do we need to tell our users? We also wanted to, we'll be covering today the point about proportionate quality assurance. This is a pretty massive project. We've got the index of multiple deprivation, we've got the domain indices, and we've got 37 input indicators, and we want to be clear, actually, where do we need to put our efforts in the QA? And we've also got very comprehensive quality assurance steps. So what I wanted to talk further on, first of all, was about putting things into perspective. And one of the conversations I remember we had with Professor Michael Noble was very useful for explaining actually that the design, the very design of the methodology for the indices of deprivation is there to ensure the quality, the reliability of these indices. And perhaps I think what emerged was that perhaps we could be more upfront with this story. So this included things like having that diversity of indicators. Now, here you've got 37 indicators. We know that actually an area has got, if an area is defined as highly deprived, it probably is going to be highly deprived across many indicators and several domains. So there's actually very little chance that an area is going to be identified as highly deprived if it's due to a bias in just one of those composite indicators. So that's about putting things into perspective. We also needed to be clear that actually we use appropriate and robust indicators, and we use these where they're based on well-understood data sources. So most of the data that we're using is from high-quality public data sources that are of national statistics quality or close or a variant of, or they are established and well-understood admin data sources that often feed into national statistics, or they use the really important tasks such as the delivery of benefits and tax credits. So they are going to have, they're going to be very robust data sets. And it's only in a small exception where we're unable to find such quality indicators that we've had to think about, can we use modelled or synthetic estimates? based, for example, on survey data or other sample data, and put together by experts in their field. And this was done in 3 cases: for housing affordability measures, for housing conditions measures, and for air quality. I talked earlier about the methodology steps, but again, we've also got a number of techniques that we're doing for dealing with improving the reliability of small area data, for bringing together the indicators into a domain in a robust manner, and for making sure that domains don't cancel each other out. So there's a story that we needed to tell about how things were put together, including the fact we give lower weight to the domains where the indicators are less reliable. So I think one of the big things that I think we achieved with this update and the publication was leading with this story very clearly about the robustness of the main product, rather than getting sucked into the minutiae of each indicator. So moving on to the next slide about setting the level of quality assurance. Now, this is where we wanted to be sure what level of quality assurance is needed and is proportionate, given the different things that we are publishing, the IMD, the domain indices, the input indicators. And what we wanted to use was this Administrative Data Quality Assurance Toolkit. It's published by the UK Statistics Authority, and at the time of doing this a few years ago, it was really put out as a new guidance document, and we found it actually very useful. And the part I particularly found useful was using this kind of a way of assessing each of our possible measures or things that we would quality assure according to both the public interest profile and concerns about data quality. And then the level of effort that we would need to expend in assurance would be set according to this. And we had really useful conversations also with the Good Practice team and the UK Stats Authority to help us use this. And what we ended up gleaning was that we felt that the index of multiple deprivation we felt was medium public interest, but actually was quite low risk in terms of quality concerns. So that might seem counterintuitive, it's a really important product, but as I've just said, you've got these very important good design principles behind it, and you've got a good set of well-established data. The domain indices we felt were similar, but slightly lower in public interest. So the input indicators, all 37 of them, on a rigorous assessment of all of them, it was decided, well, actually, okay, there is lower public interest, we know that, but the quality concerns will vary. Most of them are low because of the, I've already explained, they're all majority from very well-established sources. And so they would justify a basic level of quality assurance. However, we would want to reserve the most enhanced assurance for the IMD, given its importance, and then for a minority of indicators that we demonstrated that would be the ones where there's either concerns have been raised. I mentioned crime, some of the health indicators earlier, and also around housing affordability, which is very much a new modelled estimate. So the sort of things that we were doing were also very comprehensive. There was the team led by Oxy consisted of a number of expert teams working on each of the domains, and it was their job to ensure that they were very much aware of the strengths and weaknesses in their data, that they had a good relationship with the suppliers of data, and that we were seeking the views of users through the user engagement, which I'll be describing later. Quality assurance obviously also applies to making sure that everything you do with these complicated processing steps is well open to be audited, can be replicated and validated. So everything's done in syntax. There's none of this sort of doing things in a spreadsheet that might accidentally go and get overwritten. There was a lot of checking of real-world data. So are the input data and the output results matching your expectations? Of the changes that we're seeing between the 2010 indices and the 2015 indices, the sorts of things you'd expect. And everything was rigorously checked within Office of Consultants for Social Inclusion between the domain teams. They would check each other's work, and it would be open to external scrutiny, including end-to-end checks. And of course, there would be additional enhanced assurance of the data sets I mentioned earlier. I did want to go on now to talk about the user engagement that we were doing, and particularly how this informed our clearer communication, our improvements to our outputs. So there was there was quite a lot of engagement going on, but I think that these three steps are the main ones that I think we should cover. The first one is that we conducted a user survey very early on in the work that Oxy were doing. Oxy's first task was to get out there and scope the possible new indicators or changes to the methodology that might be made. They were open to hearing about any new ones they hadn't already thought of and discovered for themselves, and to test people's views on these. But the survey was also an opportunity to find out more about who uses our indices, what they do with it, and how well they actually understand our outputs. We then, as things progressed and as the product developed, and as our proposals developed, we led to a consultation stage where we also did some pre-consultation and early consultation user events, which were really, really well attended and an excellent opportunity for face-to-face contact. So while through the survey and the government consultation, you get some, very good representation, a lot of people were responding. What the face-to-face work gives you is this opportunity to really put colour around the suggestions that people are making, to thoroughly understand what it is about our outputs that people were having problems with, some real-life examples of the dilemmas they have. Let's say you're a local government researcher and you're under a lot of pressure to produce a briefing, and perhaps you're using the indices in ways that are not correct. How can we help them? That comes to light, particularly in those user events. And the sorts of things we learned were that actually we were getting broad support for the methods and the potential new indicators, that actually the majority of the people that were coming forward in user engagement were finding the indices actually easy to use. 90% of them did so, and they actually found them easy to interpret, slightly less at 83%. But what people really did need, and suggest we did, was produce non-technical guidance and summaries of that, to continue to produce data in spreadsheets, but to improve the way we did that and to provide the underlying data, to give them information on tools and resources. And also, they wanted more advice on using the data, especially, for example, the data space challenge from people who wanted them to use the indices in particular ways, on changes over time. That kept coming up as a topic they had problems with, and about how you can aggregate the indices up to different geographies. So I think this work really gave us a clear idea of the set of needs and what we could do to improve our outputs. What we then did was think about, well, how can we do that? One of the ways was to really meet this need for non-technical and more technical information. So on this slide here on clear communication, I've tried to set out that range between what's pitched at the lay user to the more expert user. And I agree with earlier speaker that if you see something really good, you should steal it. And we saw this excellent infographic which had been produced by the team responsible for the Welsh Indices of Deprivation. And we decided to use that as a bit of a template and adapt that somewhat. So at the lay user end, we've got this very simple but clear infographic, the sort of thing that somebody in local government, a researcher, could wave about and say, here it is, this is my guide, and this is saying very clearly what you can and can't do with the indices and what they are. You've got an explorer. This is basically an interactive mapper, and through this, we're helping people to download pretty much the information they most likely want about their area and the basic briefing about their area. We've got guidance which steps down a level from that infographic to give somebody a bit more information about the do's and don'ts of the indices of deprivation. We've got FAQs and the data, and then going more into the findings, you've got your statistical release, we did publish data in open data format. Our understanding of users was it was a real mix, and most people actually still really like spreadsheets. And we had, right at the more technical end, the research reports and the technical reports, which cover the methodology and the QA in great detail, underlying data. But to give an example then of that sort of mapper, one of the things we were trying to achieve here is knowing that the majority of users need to know about their area or their local authority. They want to know what ward it lies in, simple information like that. They need to know what its statistical, its ID codes are, because the trouble with these small areas, these neighbourhoods, is they don't go by usable names. And it's very frustrating for people. So actually just making sure that piece of information is there, it helps people to hook that in with lots of other data sources on small areas. But basically what we were interested in was write a sentence that you could list to describe your area. To say, this part of, let's say it's Hackney, is ranked 126 out of most deprived out of all areas in the country, and that's in the most deprived 10%. The infographic, this particular page, I think, this section was very useful about the do's and don'ts, and it was in response to what users wanted, and was exemplified by the Welsh infographic. We did change, actually, what we decided to clarify to what we felt was appropriate for our audience and related to the English indices. And I think my comment about this is never underestimate how hard it is to write something simple. It was very, very challenging at times to get down to a definitive point, particularly around the last bullet here, around changes in deprivation, looking at the changes in relative deprivation over time, the fact that you can look at changes in rank, but you can't measure real change in deprivation. This is challenging because actually it's what all the users want to do, but I'm afraid the indices just don't really allow you to do that. So we need to say, writ large, you can do this, you can't do that. But it was then backed up by the guidance document to say a bit more about that. But I think the other point is it gave us the opportunity to meet head on the fact that people will nevertheless do this. They will nevertheless try to make comparisons over time, and it's better if we do it and show them how it could be done and to talk them through how that could be written about, rather than to leave this for them to just adopt their own bespoke and potentially dubious ways of presenting the data. And this is also really helpful for a range of users. Like I know we've had conversations with our press officers in advance of publication. They don't get to see national statistics data in advance, but they're very concerned about how are they going to help journalists to understand the data and make sure they take away the right messages. So they were actually a really important user group in consulting them about how to get that messaging right. As a result of all of this work, I think we did get to a point where I think we've been getting really good feedback on our output. We found particularly that we got the queries when we published, the queries that we got were sort of far fewer or easier to handle, and it's sometimes about better signposting, or they were a different type of query from what we were having before. So I think that was showing some success. And also in terms of data quality, this time round we just didn't get the same types of concerns that were being raised previously. And I'm really pleased to say we did get our national statistics badge. So thank you. Can I pass back to Andy?
Right. Well, thank you very much, Baljit, for the presentation. Just a reminder to people that to ask a question, if you go into the Q&A box, that will come up and I can ask it for you. You can probably type something in public chat, or you can, if you're on the phone or you want to use the phone, then if you type *6 on your phone, that will unmute you. Once you hear you are unmuted, you can ask your question. And then after asking your question, you can press *6 to mute yourself again. I'll just perhaps start just by asking Baljit I can see there's a huge amount of work here, and I'm having been at various points used the previous incarnations of this stuff. I know how useful it is. I'm interested to know either, as you see it now, or maybe as you or your successors would see it in a few years' time. How would you know that you got it right in terms of some really complex piece of work like this? What sort of things should DCLG be doing to assess that?
So can I check, do you mean whether we got the actual measures of deprivation right or the communication right?
Well, both really,
okay.
I think.
I think how we got it right, there's a couple of angles approach to this. So we've talked a bit about quality assurance and the sorts of checks that were undertaken, and I think they were exceptionally rigorous, including, are these the sorts of changes we would expect to see in the areas where we are seeing change? Yeah. Is justified? So, for example, if you look at some parts of East London, you can see quite big changes in deprivation, and you think, well, okay, knowing what we do know about these areas, or knowing what we do know about changes to the benefit system, are these the changes we'd expect? So a lot of this work has already happened as part of the QA. The other thing to point out is we're now at the 5th version of the Indices of Deprivation. And actually, the last slide, the one that's still up on the screen, I think, is about, on the left-hand side, you've got the most deprived local authorities according to the 2010 indices. And on the right, you've got the most deprived ones according to the 2015 indices. And the top 5 lines are just saying, actually, it's the same local authorities that are the most deprived. Yeah. And actually, if you were to take this analysis down to the neighbourhood level, you can see that persistence of deprivation in places. So one of the stories is actually the way that we're measuring deprivation, it is persistent. But I think there is another way of responding to that question, which is around, are these indicators of deprivation still relevant? Are there new forms of deprivation or things that we're not anymore picking up? So you might say, for example, there's a lot of focus, for example, about managing population, isn't there? So there is, I think, always a debate to be had and a review to be had about, are these relevant indicators? But we are often stifled by the fact we don't have new data sources. They're not yet developed. But I think also we do work together with the devolved administration to think about new data sources, to think about the new issues in deprivation. But I think one of the other aspects here is we do end up with a body of users who grow accustomed to the indices as they are. One of the things that we did in our user engagement, in the user event, and also in consultations, was ask people actually about their appetite for change. Are the indices doing the right thing? Should they be doing something else? And I guess the responses you get are a product of who you talk to. So if you've got a bunch of people who've come because they're avid users and they want to have their say about your output, they maybe don't want a lot of change in this. So I think it's important to be able to engage broader users, including academics, in where next for the indices.
Okay, thanks. Are there any further questions that people wanted to ask Baljit? I'll just give people... Daryl. Yeah.
You mentioned that the devolved administrators do their own versions of Indices of Deprivation, and they're not directly comparable. And as a user of the past of them, I've always found that quite frustrating, but a lot of the users do find it frustrating as well. Is there any appetite, or has there been any appetite for a GB-wide index?
Yeah, there is some appetite, and there has been some work done by the devolved administrations to explore the potential for this. The appetite, the good thing about user research is it tells you a bit about whose appetite it is. it would seem to be coming more from academics than it is from, say, local government users. And so I think with all of these statistical outputs in government, I guess you do have a sense of who are your users and how do you balance their needs. But here with this deprivation piece, we are really, some of these issues are currently insurmountable in that you've got different administrative systems in the administration, so you haven't necessarily actually got the same indicators. In the different administrations over the years, since the indices of deprivation, there's been a bit of divergence in what's gone in that basket of indicators, where the focus has been. But there's also other insurmountable issues, like the difference of statistical geography. Data zones in Scotland are a different size to the population of the lower layer super output areas. So there's a number of issues. But I think one of the topics for discussion, as I understand it, that, though I'm not directly involved anymore, is around potential for the future. So let's think about universal credit and the impact it's going to have on the measurement of the income deprivation domain and employment deprivation domain. And is this system potentially allowing us to align at least on those domains?
I was just, can I just ask you the sort of similar question to the one I asked Daryl earlier, which is around resourcing of all this? Because, again, this is quite complicated stuff, and you've invested a lot of effort beyond actually just producing the indices. I wondered how you felt, what arguments you would put forward to justify what might turn out to be a repeat of this exercise in 2020 or something, in order to have the time to do that sort of work as well. What would be the key things that you would be arguing what might turn out to be either the sunlit uplands of Brexit or the sort of dark days of reduced expenditure, or both? Who knows?
I think one of the points here is that there is a lot of demand for the indices. They're very, very widely used, and we've got a good understanding of what people use them for. So I think the case for the indices is built upon how well used. So although we do invest in this resource, it's a one-off investment, isn't it? The government has made it in the past, and it's used many, many, many times over, and it's used in the allocation of quite large pots of money, both in central government and for making sure that the resources locally are going to wherever the local priorities are. So I think the arguments are around the use. It's a one-time investment, but many use it.
Yeah. So we've had two fascinating talks, both of which I think are around the theme of going a step beyond, really. One in terms of making our statistics much more interpretable, and the other of which providing more information and helping people to use them appropriately. And I congratulate the recipients on their awards last year, and I hope that the work will continue to develop.